Alright, and welcome back to another episode of Fumbling with Leather. I think we've gotten to a critical point now in our project for the 13th century hood. So I've cut out all the different templates, and this is the stage where we trace them and cut them out onto the leather. So behind me, if you can see, I've got 2.5 skins, one pretty big one, slightly smaller, and then half a skin that I'd already used. The guys at the leather store were also kind enough to give me this little piece of veg tan leather. So behind me is lamb Napa leather, and that I've been using in my other project as well. And this piece is actually what we can use for some tooling. It's still fairly flexible as well, so I might end up making kind of a house crest on the front. And freeze. Alright, I just wanted to take a quick break here and say this is no longer a maybe. This is a definite thing that's going to happen. We're going to put a nice crest on the back of the hood. And it's gotten so like it's become the main part of this project at this stage. I've gone a little bit overboard in terms of design, especially considering this is my first time properly embossing and painting the leather. So let's see if I've gone a bit overboard in terms of detail. I don't know, but this is kind of the design that I'm going with. So the wolf here, I have to want to mention, is a design from Hair Geyser from DeviantArt that he's allowed me to use. And the rest is kind of just amalgamations of things that I've found online, but more on that. I'll do a separate video on this entire crest, so stay tuned for that. For now, let's get back to you, Jelly. Yeah, go. So this is a very critical point, because once we start cutting into the leather, there's no going back. So I'm a little bit nervous. I've been kind of stalling in terms of doing this, because yeah, it's like, have I cut everything right to size? Are my 1 centimeter edge lines big enough? Should I do it bigger? But also, obviously, I gotta make sure that I do it once this side and once that side. Oh, you can't see that. So once this side, once that side, instead of 2 this side. And especially on a project this big, we need to ensure that we do it strategically, so we actually utilize most of the leather and we can get all the pieces out of it. So without further ado, I'm going to start cutting, I'm going to start measuring and placing the pieces to see how best to do this. Now, this smaller piece, it's got a few creases in there from storing it before, and I don't know if you can see, but some of the leather will have kind of holes in it as well. I'm assuming that's where the tail was. So we need to work around that. So let us figure out. Alright, so I think I have a plan. I can't show it to you all because we're using different sides, which actually makes this a little bit harder. So otherwise we could just place all the pieces onto the board, but now I kind of have to work a little bit, and I don't want to draw it out just yet. But I will start to do that now. But it seems like we'll actually have most of our second skin left to work with, so that could be used for another nice project, or in case we F up because I do have to admit that I'm a little bit hesitant, not just to cut this, but to start as well. There's still, you know, once you start sewing, it's like, oh, did I start at the right point? Should I have done something before? Because I'm going to line this with fur as well, I'm still kind of debating, do I put the fur on these individual pieces and then sew everything together, or do I sew all of this together and then put the fur on as one big thing on the inside? And because we're fumbling through this project, I actually have no idea which one would be the better. I can see pros and cons to each. Obviously doing it all as one piece makes the inside nice and cohesive, no gaps from the sewing. The seams from the sewing will be nice and hidden. And doing this all at once gives me an idea of what if I put it on without the lining, how heavy is it, how nice would it be to do like a summer version of it. The trick I'm seeing to doing all the fur at once is, obviously this is flat now, I can easily use this to cut out the fur as well, but if it's all one piece and it's nice and rounded and stuff like that, cutting out the fur is going to be a lot harder. So that's something I have to think about. I'm also trying to order some new tools so that we are fumbling less, I guess. Buying tools is always hard, I never know what to choose, but anyway, that's for another time. Let's get started in drawing this out and then cutting the pieces. Cutting the pieces. Right, so quick note here is I'm just using some sellotape to tape the pieces onto the leather so they don't move, and then I'm using a Tandy leather pen to make the markings because this comes off very quickly. You could use a permanent marker, but then you'd have to kind of take that into account when you're cutting, and you can see the leather pen just below here. Alright, so moment of truth. Not sure how, as you can see, I've drawn out the different shapes and I've tried to utilize as much the leather as I can, as close to the edges as I can, so that what I'm left with is not a whole bunch of small pieces, but the biggest piece that might still be usable in some way. So the next question then is whether to use scissors or a knife to cut these out. With leather like this, I definitely use a knife, but with leather like this on big pieces like this, so like if it's smaller, I'd still use probably a knife. If it was straight edges, I might use a knife, but because this is kind of circular and stuff like that, I am going to use the scissors, I think, because it's thin, pliable, should be fine, and hopefully we'll still get nice direct cuts. So let's get started on that. While we're at it, what I'm going to do, because as you remember, we added in an extra centimeter, which is kind of these lines, so I kind of want to have a general idea of where they are. So I'm going to bring them back in. Now I'm just going to place a few dots so it doesn't mar the surface too much. And there you have it. Alright, so that's pretty much it in terms of how to cut everything. I'll do the rest now in a minute. And just one note before I leave is all of these kind of discarded pieces, stuff like this. Well, this I'd probably throw away, but even this, like, I'd probably keep. Especially these bigger pieces, you might be able to use them in other projects, but even stuff like this I'd keep. They're a great way to kind of test out new paints or new designs or new ways of doing things. If it's vegetable tan, you can use them to do some tooling practice, stuff like that. So for instance, this I used to test the acrylic. And then here specifically, get it, there we go. So hope you can see that. I just kind of tested out different stitching, so I'm looking to use that potentially on the edges of the hood as an ornamental way of stitching versus just a straight line. And I've actually got a third option now that I'm going to test out in a minute. But yeah, that's what these are great for, is to just try things out instead of having to use and potentially ruining one of your projects. So yes. Obviously, quick note, this takes a hell of a lot more thread and will take a lot more hours, so that's something to take into consideration as well. But anyway, for now, I'd say good afternoon, good evening, and good night.